Hello everyone, and thank you for joining our talk. My name is Ismail, and later I'll be joined by my colleague Doug, and our special guest Dimitar, who is the financial director at the Financial Times. And together, we hope to take you through the story of how the Financial Times unlocked business growth using Amazon Redshift. So to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about today, it's a bit of a mixed session. At the beginning, we're going to be talking tech and we're going to be talking architecture. Then we're going to be talking about the partnership between AWS and the Financial Times and how we work together to shape a data strategy that aligns with the vision and the business goals of the Financial Times. And then how the Financial Times was actually able to translate this into execution and help them realize their vision through re-architecting Redshift and their data platform and aligning that with their business goals. So we'll talk about the tech first, and then I'll hand it over to Doug. Now, most people here know that data warehousing has been around for quite some time. And we've looked at a data warehouse classically as the single version of the truth for our organization. And that made sense as a paradigm at the time, especially because it was mainly for serving BI workloads. But with the proliferation of new data sources and the expansion of data as a tool for insights and for actually producing ROI for the business, we've had an increase in consumers as well. So there are so many workloads that go into the data warehouse now. And using this single cluster approach brings certain challenges. The first is scalability constraints. There's a limit to how much you can vertically scale. The second is workload interference. You have different priorities from different workloads, different time sensitivities, but they're all contending for the same resources, the same CPU, the same I/O, the same memory. Now, you can organize your data warehouse horizontally, like we saw on the last slide, batch ingestion, streaming ingestion, BI reports, etc. You can also organize it by group or by department. So you can bring in your human resources, your R&D, you can finance. And again, if you put them all into a single cluster, you'll have a number of other challenges. One of them is suboptimal resource optimization. So if you have different SLAs for different departments, you're going to have a challenge. So if there is an executive dashboard that needs to be refreshed every hour, but you have a long-running query from finance for a monthly report that's not necessarily time sensitive, that's not going to align with your business goals, and you're going to have a lot of angry users on your hands. The second is it's complex to isolate data. And this is an issue because since everybody's getting their hands on data now, this can increase the risk and exposure for data leaks, and you want to minimize the data that you give to users so that only the ones who need them at the time that they need them for the time that they need them have the appropriate access. Isolating data is not the only concern you have when you organize your data warehouse this way. It's also a challenge in terms of chargeback. It's not the case in a lot of organizations now that the data warehouse is solely the line item in the costing of the IT team. Now, it is part of everybody's ROI calculation. And so businesses are now putting skin in the game and actually asked to bring forth their budgets to produce insights for their teams. And so having chargeback in this model is quite difficult. And finally, regulatory challenges. If you have different regulatory requirements for different departments and you need to treat data differently that's sensitive from data that is maybe not so sensitive, you're going to have trouble doing that when the data is not isolated. So what we're going to be talking about today is breaking that up into a multi-cluster architecture. So in this situation, each workload, whether it's horizontal or vertical, is going to have its own endpoint. It's going to have its own resources, and it can also have its own access management and users that are privy to it. However, the storage is still shared. This is important because you want to be able to reduce data duplication, which we'll talk about later on, while still having a unified view of what the data actually is. So you can still have that single version of the truth, but not necessarily physically have it on one cluster. So in this setup, whether you do it horizontally or you do it vertically, everybody has the right resources that they need to match their query workloads, their query patterns, and the quirkiness of their specific workload, as well as being able to charge back to the appropriate departments and being able to manage data isolation separately for each of them. So we talked conceptually about how you can transition from a single to a multi-cluster architecture and why that would benefit you in general. Now we'll take a few minutes to talk about how Redshift powers that type of architecture. So Amazon Redshift, for those of you who don't know, it is a born-in-the-cloud, highly performant, massively parallel processing data warehouse that is based on a Postgres fork. I'm sure you've been to many sessions already detailing its different features. But just at a high level, there are different flavors of Redshift. There's provisioned and there's serverless. Provisioned you can use when you have a steady state workload where the needs of the workload are predictable and you want to optimize your price performance. Redshift serverless is another flavor of Redshift. That is usually what we recommend if you have a new workload that is unknown and you want to match the demand to the supply, as we say, and you can scale up and down as per the needs of the workload. And then if it becomes more steady state or the query pattern becomes more obvious, then you can decide if you want to move it to provisioned or not. All of it is backed by that unified storage layer, as I mentioned. Now, it is backed by S3. However, the storage is managed by Redshift, called Redshift Managed Storage, so you don't have to worry about the hot and cold tiering. You don't have to worry about how the data sharing works. That all happens seamlessly within Redshift, and whatever mode you're using, serverless or provisioned, and however you want to share the data between them, that is something that Redshift takes care of. So if you see here, you have different endpoints, different clusters of different sizes, and they both read and write from the storage, and you can set up data sharing between them so that you have producer and consumer clusters, and a consumer cluster you can also set it to produce, so that you can read and write from these different clusters to each other and share data across your organization, and also be in control of the data that you are sharing to different people in your organization as well. So in this way, we've taken the older architectural best practice of separation of concerns. We've separated compute and storage. But we can also take that a step further by separating the concern of engine and permissions, or compute and permissions. Classically, in many query engines, we've had the permissions model embedded within the engine itself, and that has been the case for Redshift classically. But we've evolved our platform as well so that you can decouple these permissions and you can make use of the AWS Glue data catalog, which is a technical metadata catalog that integrates with the rest of the AWS analytics ecosystem, as well as Lake Formation, which is responsible for doing the credential vending and managing row and column level access as an abstraction on top of the Glue data catalog, and that integrates with your different services. So you can see here on the left, you have Athena, you've got Glue, you've got EMR. So in this way, you can manage your permissions for your users once, and then they can decide what query engine they want to do over that shared storage layer. So that was a quick brief about, from an architecture perspective, what you can do to scale your architecture with your business. We've also talked about how you can do that with Redshift specifically. Now, the theory part of the presentation is done. I'm going to ask Doug to join me on stage to show you how they and him and Financial Times have had rubber hit the road.
Thanks a lot, Ismail. Architects seem to have a solution for everything, don't they? But do they have a solution for your problem? Are you able to take a generic solution off the shelf and integrate that into your environment? Does your team have the skills necessary to actually implement that? So how is it that architects are actually able to help businesses grow? Well, to help you understand a little bit about architects, I'm going to tell you something about myself. So one time I was invited to a party where I was presented with a rather daunting opportunity. There was a band playing on stage, and they invited anybody who wished to come and join them. Now, why was this daunting? Well, one of the members of the band was John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin. So nobody had the courage to join this band, including myself. However, when I started to listen to the music they were playing, I realized that I knew all the songs, but they weren't finishing the songs. And when they were doing Beatles tunes, there was no harmonies. So I knew I had to help these guys out. So I leapt on the stage, strapped on a guitar, helped them finish the songs, and added harmonies when I could. But all the while, I felt that John Paul Jones was looking over at me and giving me the evil eye, as though he were saying, "Who is that complete unknown on my stage?" So later in the evening, the band launched into a song that they clearly didn't remember how to play. But I knew how to play it, so I led the band through the song. And it was at this point that John Paul Jones leant over to see what I was doing. "What is that chord?" "E minor 7. "Got it." So this is typical of how architects behave. You know, one day they're joining a band and helping them finish their songs, and another day they're joining the Financial Times to help them innovate with data. We like to get involved and make a difference. So now I'd like to share with you my experience on how I got involved and made a difference with the Financial Times to help them modernize their data platform. When I first met with the Financial Times, I was aware that they had a performance issue with our Amazon Redshift data warehouse, and that this issue had persisted for quite some time. Now, what we could have done is just sent them an email with a list of things to optimize their Amazon Redshift cluster, but we didn't. Instead, we went to Bulgaria to visit the team to find out what they were building so that we could understand what the source of the performance issue was to deliver a lasting solution. Now, the first thing that we discovered was that some of the consumer teams were copying data from the Redshift cluster to a new platform and using their own tools to get the performance they needed to be successful. This meant that the data engineers needed to build bespoke data pipelines to ensure data consistency across these platforms. The next thing we learned was that there was such a huge backlog of requests for new features that the data platform team were forced to rush through tactical solutions just to get something delivered. This added complexity, redundancy, increased costs, and also added latency as the data now had multiple jumps it needed to go through to finally get into the landing zone. So, it was clear that to resolve this issue properly and to enable growth, then we needed to modernize the data platform. Now, as this is something that does take time, we realized we needed some quick wins to help build support from the teams. So the first thing that we did was to complete a proof of concept using the Redshift multicultural approach that Ismail, wherever Ismail is now, that was describing earlier. So the idea was that we would deploy a second Redshift cluster to support the BI dashboards to share the same data that was already available in the main cluster. This means we no longer needed to have a bespoke data pipeline and copying data from place to place. So we reduced redundancy and also reduced costs. This also increased the bandwidth for the data engineers to now focus on more innovative tasks. The next thing we did was have a full day on-site training session to help build the skills of the team to troubleshoot and resolve performance issues on their own. And we even solved 2 problems right there on the spot. We took 2 workloads that were running in hours and optimized them to run in minutes. So now that we had built a trusting relationship with the Financial Times, it was time for us to collaborate a little bit more closely to help them build out their data platform. At AWS, we like to identify the business outcomes that make our customers successful and work backwards from that. We'd already worked with the data platform team to understand what they were building and the challenges they faced in doing so. Now we wanted to understand how people needed to use that platform and what the strategic value was of that platform to the Financial Times. So I spoke to the CTO and I asked her, what are your strategic objectives? And she said she wanted nothing less than to completely transform the Financial Times into becoming a data-driven organization. So what does this mean? This means that she wanted to collect data on transactions and interactions of their subscribers around the globe to build a 360-degree profile of their preferences. Insights from this data would then enable the Financial Times to develop better and more relevant content for their subscribers. This data could then also be fed into AI models to deliver a more personalized experience for their online users, thereby increasing engagement for existing subscribers to reduce churn, but also to increase interest in prospective customers so that they become subscribers. And there was one other thing. Oh, it had to be a high-performance solution, it had to scale with business growth, and it had to be at a cost that the FT was comfortable with. That's all. Now, I also spoke to the CDO, who leads a number of teams, among them the data science team and the business intelligence team. So she said that her teams were challenged to get the data that they needed from across the organization and found it even harder to onboard third-party data from outside of the organization. She wanted her teams to have easy-to-use tools so they could ingest and prepare data themselves without having to wait for another team to build new infrastructure. So we took all this back to AWS and spoke to our product teams. We wanted to examine our roadmaps to see what new services and what features would enable this vision to be realized. The first we discovered, of course, was the Redshift multi-cluster architecture. So this would enable the Financial Times to build a distributed data warehouse where each domain, project, or in fact type of workload would have its own dedicated compute, all of which would share the same data. We could also take advantage of the Redshift Zero ETL feature. This means that changes in the operational databases could be collected and automatically delivered to the warehouse without having to build any ETL processes. We also found a unified development environment which would enable data engineers, data scientists, and data analysts to collaborate more effectively by sharing data, tools for analytics and AI, and as well as sharing the code that they were using to build their applications. This would enable the data analysts with no coding experiences to use natural language to describe the data pipelines they wanted to build and have that automatically generated using our GenAI assistant, Amazon Q for developers, and render that code visually so it's easy for them to tweak. They can also take these data sets and publish them to a centralized business catalog, enabling anyone in the organization to discover and use that data. So we took these features and used them to design a modern data architecture that would enable the Financial Times to grow, where they would also reduce time to market and increase innovation by democratizing data and tools. So now that we had aligned the roadmap of the Financial Times to modernize their data platform, with new features up and coming with AWS to help them out, we decided that we then needed to surface these solutions with the teams in London and also the teams in Bulgaria. Our objective was to show that we had listened and that we were developing a solution that was right for the Financial Times. So we socialized our architecture, we presented demos on new features that had yet to be announced and were not available to anyone, and also shared our product roadmaps. This also gave us the opportunity to collect more feedback from more stakeholders to assure ourselves that we had the right solution for everyone. Now our next step, now that we had a design, is to determine how are we going to accelerate the development of the components that would then modernize the data platform. So at AWS, we have many programs that makes life easier for our customers. I'm going to focus on the three here that were central to help the Financial Times get started with executing on their vision. Firstly, we have the Migration Acceleration Program, which enables customers to save on costs to offset the costs that they would otherwise pay when migrating to AWS. There is also our professional services team, which sits side by side with your own teams, bringing years of experience to your team to accelerate development while also building the skills of your team to take ownership of the modernized platform. We also, of course, have the training and certification courses to build skills from anywhere from cloud fundamentals to specialized skills for security and AI. So I hope now you have a better idea of how we architects work, how we like to get involved and make a difference. So now that I've told you my story, it's time to hear the real story. So I'd like to now introduce Dimitar Terziev, the Director of Technology at the Financial Times, to tell you what actually happened. There you are.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you. Hi, everyone. If I need to explain this transformation in one sentence, I will probably use this one. This is a quote from John Kundert, or JK, as everyone calls him at the FT, and he is the Chief Product and Technology Officer there. And this means that we are building a data platform that's going to support all of the businesses across the FT Group product portfolio. But most importantly, a data platform so that everyone in the organization can access and work with data and make decisions, data-driven decisions, as part of their day-to-day jobs. I'm pretty sure this won't come as a surprise. We are a global media organization known for its gold standard journalism, and we've been around for quite some time. And I'm pretty sure that whenever you hear FT, you think about ft.com and the mobile app, which are our flagship products, underpinning a big portion of our B2B and B2C business. But we also have a booming events business, FT Live, which essentially is about organizing events across the globe, many of which with tens of thousands of attendees. We also have a set of B2B titles that are operating in areas such as banking, investment, and sustainability. And we also have a print business, of course. And you can imagine how many different types of customers we need to serve. What you probably don't know is that we've been a pioneer in many areas, including technology. But today, we're going to talk about business growth. And in our thinking, a data-driven organization such as the Financial Times can unlock growth through a number, in this case 6 pillars. And the first one, to no surprise, will be scalable architecture, an architecture that can cope with the growth of the business, an architecture that can cope with peaks of usage and peaks of data ingestion, an architecture where we can easily onboard new and different data products. The next one is real-time data. Nowadays, everyone expects to have data as fast as possible into their hands. From the editorial teams at the FT monitoring the performance of their content pieces on the homepage, to business personas and product people observing A/B tests or how specific features on our products are performing. The next one, and I'm sure this also won't come as a surprise, is AI and ML. We live at times where artificial intelligence is all around us, and especially generative one. And this creates a lot of risks for many businesses, to be completely honest, including in media and publishing, but also creates a lot of opportunities. So we want a data platform that can help us seize those opportunities rather than just mitigating the risks. The next pillar really talks about the ability for more and more people to interact with data in the organization so they can draw insights. And in order to do so, in order to do this at scale, we need to create a data platform that will have self-service built within it. Because otherwise, people will always rely on a set of teams or a set of people to do the job and draw the data that they need. From the data engineers that are tapping into the data streams up until the business people who will be interacting with data, as Doug said, through generative AI or user interfaces. And in order to create this, though, we need to have governance by default. We are a data-driven organization, and it will come to no surprise again that we've been having a data platform for quite some time, though. The first version of the data platform, as we know it today, has been conceived circa 2013. And it started as a data warehousing solution built on top of Redshift. And this was actually months after Redshift was officially released, 5-6 months or something like this. So it was designed to execute typical heavy analytical workloads. As the business grew and new requirements came, we built on top of this a BI and reporting layer that also came with its own specific requirements. Imagine many people accessing many dashboards simultaneously and refreshing those. And this BI and reporting layer obviously came with these very specific requirements, and in order to respond to them, we had to introduce a third-party solution in the mix. Fast forward to nowadays, we are embedding more and more machine learning models and using AI across our products. And those things also came with their own requirements, from the ability to store embeddings, to provide recommendations, through executing real-time analytic workloads or through having an online and offline feature stores. And yet again, we had to introduce a number of third parties into the mix. And if we are to have a look of the architecture of the data platform before the start of this transformation project, from 10,000 feet, it will be something like this. Do you spot any problems with it, by the way? Or it's perfectly fine? What do you think? Well, for sure, we see that there is a lot of data redundancy, and Doug has already spoke about this. And I don't want to repeat what he said. What I want to emphasize is the following. Apparently, it has worked for us. It took us thus far. And I'm not saying that third-party solutions are bad. No, they're not. But this was not a foundation that we wanted to build our future architecture on top. And I think there is a bigger problem underneath this. You see, we have many engineering personas and even customers of the data platform who operate across all those solutions. And sometimes, naturally, people have blind spots for some of the things, some of the pipelines, what data is available where, what are the default retention policies across those different stores. Do we have PI data elsewhere aside of our main Redshift cluster? How far back in time the data goes, for example, in some of those third-party solutions. And this is problematic. And it led to the conclusion that we have a number of problems aside of the technology one that we need to solve. And the first one is being that our teams operate in silos. And the problem also is that the natural tendency of people is to solve the problems where they feel most comfortable with, which not necessarily is the right place to solve them to start with. But this was also a function of the fact that we had a fragmented stack, which increased the latency of making available certain data sets, redundancy, a lot of cost, operational overhead. And the bottom line of this is that we were not making the best out of our data assets. And you can imagine that if we have to continue with this, we won't be doing so with the future data assets that we want to build and the data products. Well, luckily, as you have heard from my colleagues from AWS, we spent a lot of time not only with them, but assessing what solutions are available on the market, and we decided to base the future data platform on Redshift multi-clusters architecture. And again, this is the reason why we're here today, of course. And my idea right now is not to talk about the benefits of this, because you've heard Ismail talking about those things. I want to tell you what we have already done, what we are planning to do for this year, and how we're going to realize growth out of this. So this is the future architecture that we are aiming to have here at the Financial Times. And by looking at this, I'm pretty sure you will agree that it's way clearer as an architecture, right? We are making use of the great data sharing capabilities that Redshift multi-cluster architecture provides. So data will be available across all of the data stores. We still have our main Redshift cluster, which is there and it's optimized, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute. And we've also introduced this additional Redshift cluster for our BI and reporting colleagues. And this cluster is optimized to power the specific workloads and the dashboarding solution that we have today. And we can, as I said, easily share data between those two. Tables, views, materialized views, simple as that. Which means less moving parts, which means less operational overhead, less costs. But there is more to it, you know. And I'm sure that it's not something specific for the Financial Times. We have many systems that we ingest data from. Some of those are third parties, of course. But some of the critical ones, where, for example, we ingest user data or subscriptions, they are running on AWS data stores, which means we can take advantage of things like zero ETLs. And in combination with the data sharing, it's make the new architecture really, really simple and elegant. Later in the year, we will introduce yet another cluster, this time serverless Redshift cluster for our colleagues from the data science team and for the data analysts. But there is one more thing, though, again, that I want to emphasize on. And by having this clean architecture and having similar tools, similar solutions that all of our data engineering roles will operate in, this will help us break down those silos. And this is critical for us. So this is how you introduce a change in your organization that is not just purely technical. So now I want to talk about in a bit more detail how we've already realized growth with the work that we have done. You've heard, Doug, that they helped us optimize our main Redshift cluster. And just to give you a bit of a context, we've been around, this platform has been around for more than 12 years, and we've accumulated quite a lot of data, around 230 terabytes of it, which is around 4,000 tables. Quite a lot, right? So before the beginning of this project, as Doug mentioned, we were having problems with execution times, and this resulted at an average queue time for our jobs in the busy Monday mornings of around 90 minutes, which is not great, to be honest. So we took advantage of the automatic table optimization that Redshift provides, and only by enabling this, we've managed to speed up the execution times of many of the jobs, which brought down the average queue time to 20 minutes. But we didn't want to stop there. Doug mentioned the workshop in Sofia last year. They helped us optimize the most critical tables that we have, and they also helped us right-size the cluster for our current needs and to allow us future growth, which brought down the execution times and the average queue time to 2 minutes. And the result of all this is the fact that we now manage to produce our executive board reports, which we produce every Monday morning, 30% faster. And the added value from this is that we now have consistent outcomes. We are building this confidence in our customers, internal customers, that we can deliver. And this is very important. This is your recipe for growth. Consistency and confidence in what you provide. The next area that I want to talk about in a bit more detail is AI and ML. We are building many data science models, and I want to give you an example with a set of state-of-the-art models that we developed last year to help us reduce the churn of our customers. So our data science team was working with those models, everything was great, until we reached the point with the data exploration phase. And at that time, because these were a new set of data models, our colleagues hit a bit of a problem. They were not aware what data was available and what data they can use. And also remember the previous slide, they were operating in a slightly different environment than the main Redshift cluster. And the way to solve the problem was through many Slack messages, meetings with upstream, downstream teams. You know, we've managed to overcome this, and one thing became evident. We were lacking this enterprise business catalog that my colleagues mentioned previously. But there was one more thing. I would argue that even if we had this catalog, it wouldn't be enough to solve the problem, because what they need, our colleagues, to create those data science models is secure, isolated data exploration environment where they can see what data is available, where they can query all the historical data, because this was the other problem essentially. They were not able to see all the historical data, and when you make specific data science models, this is problematic. So what we are doing to solve this problem, aside of building an enterprise data catalog, well, you saw the third Redshift cluster, which is a serverless. We want to create a third cluster where we're going to share all the data with the main cluster and let them explore data. Let them do their work with more data, which will help them create more sophisticated models, but also shorten the time for the creation of those models, which shortens the time for your time to market, essentially. You can release features faster. So this is an area where we will be definitely investing for the remainder of the year. And the goal here, as I said, is to be able to create more sophisticated data science model faster. The next thing where we feel like we will be able to realize growth at scale is within data governance. You've already heard how not having an enterprise catalog can hurdle the process of creating data science models, or any data product for that matter, to be completely honest. But aside of this, we want to make a change, organizational change. And this means that we want to introduce a set of processes and personas in our organization. We want to introduce people like data owners, data stewards, data custodians, and help people transition into those roles and get familiar with the new processes of dealing with data. Because your data products are as good as your data. So we want to introduce this federated data ownership model, but we are not stopping there. The confidence You can build confidence by quality, especially when we talk about data products, quality is essential. So aside of the federated ownership model, we want to introduce quality checks and lineage, visibility, how your data flows from the source system to the end consumer. And with the data quality checks, we will be able to spot problems very early without reaching the downstream systems. So essentially, the goal of this work is to balance innovation, let the people work and innovate, my colleagues, but also manage the risk, manage the access controls. So this is for this year. But what is next? What is above, after 2025? Well, I've talked about quite a lot about data products, and they are mainly data products about structured data, but those are not all the data products that you want to build in Financial Times. The idea is to build a data platform where everyone will be able to ingest data, whether it's structured, unstructured, semi-structured, store this data, model this data, and then use the data through a unified interface without caring where this data is stored, essentially. So we want to get the best of both worlds. And as we are approaching, and we've managed to change the slide. As we are approaching the end of my part, I want to share some key takeaways with you. So the first one is about understanding your current workloads, understanding where your problems are today. It's hard to build a vision if you don't know where you're starting from, because it's going to be a very different journey to achieving this vision. So break down and distribute your workloads, understand which are the critical workloads, build the priority queues, see where the bottlenecks are. The next one is about choosing the right topology for your multi-cluster architecture with Redshift. It might mimic your organizational structure, it might not if you want to introduce a change. But the most important thing is that you should easily onboard your customers into this new architecture. The third one is about common transformations. Try to make those transformations where it makes sense. Like, for example, in our architecture, the main Redshift cluster is the ingestion cluster, and it makes sense to do the common transformation in there rather than on the other clusters where you just need to share the data and use the compute for this. And the last one here is about, again, choosing Redshift serverless when you're not sure what will be the load, what will be the usage patterns for your data. Ismail mentioned about this, and we are doing the same with our data science Redshift cluster. We are starting with a serverless. And before I go, I want to leave you with a quote from Rebecca Salisbury, the Chief Technology Officer of the Financial Times. And I think this is a very important quote. For everyone who is embarking on a data transformation or any transformation project, a big part of the success of such a project is about introducing the right processes and making a systemic change in your organization. And this is the key thing. And as for the technology, well, I guess we can always rely on Redshift multi-cluster architecture. And with that, I would like to invite John Paul Jones of AWS. I meant Doug, apologies.
Thank you, Dimitar. Thank you. You can stay. Thank you very much, Dimitar. That was very interesting. So, such an inspiring vision that you and the team have developed at the FT. And I know that everybody is super excited about getting involved and making a difference. One thing I would like to note, though, is that you're not building this data platform in isolation where people have to wait months or years to take advantage of it. You're actually evolving your current environment and delivering value continually over time, enabling the Financial Times to grow from day one. And I would like to add that it's a pleasure to work at the Financial Times. Everybody wants to change the world, and it makes for a very bright, vibrant atmosphere.
Thank you, Doug.
So for those of you who found this an interesting and inspiring chat, if you would like to build your own multi-cluster environment, please take the time to take out your mobile phones and capture these QR codes to get more information about how to do so. You'll find it's very easy. Do it in half an hour, or maybe a bit more. So I'll give you a moment to capture this, and then we have a couple more slides before the end of our session. While you still have your phones out, we would kindly like to ask you to take part in our survey. Your feedback is very important for us, and it helps us to improve the services that we deliver to our customers. It should only take 30 seconds, no longer than that. Again, I'll give you a little bit of time to do this. In the meantime, you're looking sharp today.
Thank you. Good to look.
All right.
As usual.
Okay, okay, okay. Now, thank you very much, everyone here, for taking the time to listen to us and enjoy. I hope you enjoyed our session. And if you would like to learn more, Ismail, Dimitar, and I will be available for the rest of the day. But if you would like to embark on a similar journey, please do get in touch with your AWS account team who can help you to do so. And at this point, again, I would like to thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of the day of the summit. Thank you very much.